On today's episode, we look at a Disney fan justifying bad character development. Take a look at what happens when you cave in to the demands of the mob. Here's someone telling you to ignore the CDC and wear a mask indoors. Look at someone freaking out over someone else having friends. And lastly, find someone who wants to lock up the enemies of democracy. This is Cringe Posts. Hello friends, welcome to this episode of the Cringe Posts podcast. This is the show where we gather the cringiest political and cultural takes that you see in your online feeds. We break them down, we talk about why they have a misunderstanding, where they went wrong, those kinds of things. Hopefully have a laugh along the way. My name is Donald, my co-host Britt is out, and so today I have my friend Nick with me to help, so thanks for coming on, Nick. And before we get started, just a reminder to like and comment and share if you are enjoying these episodes. We appreciate it. It helps us grow, and we love to continue that growth. We also have a companion on our website if you are listening to the audio version and you want to take a look at these cringes after or as you listen. You can go to cringeposts.com to find those. And then lastly, before we make fun of other people's bad takes, we always like to make fun of our own posts. And so my friend Nick here is somewhat of a ghost on the internet. But that being said, he does have a cringy experience that he's going to talk about here. So thanks for coming on, Nick, and let's hear about your little cringe.
Well, I kind of wish that I had more cringe on social media, because then I wouldn't have to tell this story. But kind of digging back into the archives here, a few years ago, I was working at a private Christian university, and my colleagues and I decided to do a Christmas lip sync for our employee Christmas party in front of all the employees. And I was saddled with doing, what was the song?
Baby, It's Cold Outside.
That's right. I told you earlier, and then I just forgot. It's Baby, It's Cold Outside, and I was saddled with the female part. And so I wore the wig and had some tights on. And it was especially cringy given the demographic nature of our audience. I would say I would do it again, but that doesn't make it any less cringy.
Well, the weird thing is that you volunteered for the female part because you already had the tights and the wig, right? Is that?
No.
Now, the question is, did you offend a lot of people because they don't understand the context of the song where it's written where what's in this drink doesn't mean you're getting drugged, but it means like alcohol.
Right. Well, the thing is that I obviously would have been politically correct if I had been able to choose the John Legend version. But as it was, I was not able to choose the song. So I did the very, very inappropriate version of Baby, It's Cold Outside.
And here, speaking of weird versions of that song, my wife and I like to watch really cringy movies a lot. And so we, especially in Christmas time, there's a lot of like Hallmark type style, really cringy movies. There's one that came out, I don't know if it came out last year or the year before that, called Love Hard. It's like a mix of Love Actually and Die Hard. I know, terrible name. Wow. And the joke is that those are the two favorite movies of the people. But they have this scene where they do a rendition of Baby, It's Cold Outside. But the main female protagonist has expressed her discontent with the song because they think it's inappropriate and pressuring a female into doing something she doesn't want to do, which again ignores the whole context of what the song is supposed to be. But regardless, so they do this rendition of the song, and it's the cringiest thing. It's supposed to be cute and funny, where she sings the part as normal, sort of the "I really can't stay," and then the male protagonist goes, "Okay, there's the door." And like it's like that's the whole bit. Is he saying, "Okay, you can leave whenever"? The entire thing. It's so stupid, and it made me crawl out of my skin.
Yeah, that really ratchets up the sensual tension, in a love song. It's when you're like, "Yeah, you can leave whenever you want. Go ahead. There's the door. Go on."
To add a little bit of self cringe here, that actually makes me think when I was dating my wife before we were married. At one point, we were just getting to know each other, and we were taking a walk somewhere, and she's like, "Oh, my hands are kind of cold," like wanting me to hold her hand, and I was like, "Oh, I've got gloves in the car. Do you want to?" Completely missed it. It was
went right over.
I only figured that out after the fact. So
So now
Okay.
when she says that, I assume that you smother her hand with your hands and make sure that
Yes,
she's all
absolutely.
warm, right?
Yeah, I try to start
good.
a fire. Yeah,
It's too hot, Donald. Too hot.
exactly. Okie dokie. Well, with that being said, we are going to move on to our cringe posts here. And similar to Britt, who Nick is taking the place of for this episode, Nick also feels similarly to Britt and I on Disney's latest flop, which is The Book of Boba Fett. Unfortunately, that show did not rescue itself. But here we have a take involving The Book of Boba Fett. So it's the tweet that we are going to be criticizing here is a screen cap of a tweet that shows a picture and a meme. So it's kind of 3 levels deep here. I'm going to start with the first post here, which reads, "They basically made him," meaning Boba Fett, "the Mandalorian," the name of another character in the Star Wars universe that they've created the show of. Lame. And then there's this meme that sort of compares Boba Fett and his name is Jin, but we'll just call him the Mandalorian for the sake of clarity. It doesn't compare those two, it just compares Boba Fett, but that's what the other guy was comparing. So this meme shows what we thought Boba Fett was like: is a loner, betrays everyone, hates everyone, is disrespectful, holds a lot of grudges, kills everyone he doesn't like, probably has sex, doesn't talk much, has no morals. And then the side column is how he actually is: loyal, friendly to many, makes deals, tries to be peaceful, doesn't support slavery, smack talks Bo-Katan, a known racist, xenophobic terrorist, is constantly bullied but still wishes people the best, shows respect to people, doesn't support non-consensual sex, is a daddy's boy, is short. Okay, I don't know where they get half of these things. That post in and of itself is insanely cringy. The last thing is, so the post that was sort of deriding this is quote retweeted, and the final cringe post here reads, "Fan bros thinking it's lame that Boba Fett, checks notes, doesn't support slavery and rape." Okay, so much to unpack here. First of all, pretty sure there's absolutely nothing about sex brought up in the Star Wars universe. I don't know where that comes into play ever, and that's just wild that it made its way into this post at all. Second, there's this really weird attitude that people have where they think that in order to tell a good story or to create an interesting or good character, they have to be morally pure and these goody two-shoe kind of characters. So there's no room in people's head for a well-written antagonist who is the star of a show or a series or a story of some kind that you're not necessarily rooting for. You kind of see this even with the memes about Rick and Morty, where there's obviously the you have to have a large IQ to understand it, but I'm talking more about how many culturally left people mock and criticize people who idolize Rick Sanchez, because Rick is kind of a jerk and a dick, and they're like, you missed the point. You're supposed to cheer against him. And when people actually try to emulate him, that is cringy and that is stupid, because the point is he's a compelling character in a show that's well written because he is morally deficient and selfish, and you aren't supposed to emulate him. So they get that right in that context. But here, that logic doesn't carry through to them, and they think, wow, you're upset that they made him a nice guy and because you wanted him to support slavery? Okay, how are you so cool? How are you so morally good when you wanted this character to support slavery, and that he doesn't makes him less cool? It's just such a childish take to think, no, we were set up with a character who is sort of ruthless and cold-hearted, and then you totally turn him into something he's not, and that's unfortunate and lame.
Yeah, and to go back to your earlier point for a second, just see that, there's like this, these, how would I say, kind of nested straw men in this, where you have the first one that's like, Boba probably likes sex. And you're like, okay, what? And then the second guy is like, well, Boba, in your world supported rape. It's like, what? So I feel like they're kind of talking at cross points. But to your
right.
to your latter point, I think actually, Donnie, I was thinking about rebooting The Godfather, and I want to direct a new Godfather where Al Pacino is, just a very kind-hearted Godfather that rules through respect rather than fear. Right. And I really think that the audience that fell in love with The Godfather is going to really enjoy this new Al Pacino. I'm utterly convinced that they're going to love it.
And make sure that it's the same titular character. It's not a reboot. It's the same character. It's the same universe. It's the same world. To confirm that.
Exactly. And it's so crazy to me that people, are willing to look past these major character differences just to suit their own moral agenda. And, I would be completely fine with a redemption arc for Boba if it was done well. And I don't know that you could do it well. That's the problem, is that I think his character, even if you go back to Attack of the Clones and kind of see the genesis of the Boba character, that it would be hard to, have a convincing redemptive arc. But I think if they were able to do that well and not just say, oh, he, fell in love with some Tuskens. Now he's a nice guy. Now he lowers water prices. It's like, come on, man. Give me a break.
Yeah, well, and you look at his entire character. I mean, they don't give you a ton to work with in the first 6 movies of his character, but everything you do know is he's ruthless, he's brutal. He's had his father murdered in front of him by, this sort of warring existence. And that turned him into this bounty hunter who works for the Empire, has no moral qualms with any of that. If coming out of the Sarlacc pit where he'd sort of been devoured, and he survives that, and that, their sort of in-universe explanation is that made him not want to be a bounty hunter anymore. He's tired of working for other people. Everything that leads up to that point, though, means that if that is how he feels, then he would want to strike it out on his own, and he would want to be his own boss, not part of a community where he's helping other people. That's kind of like saying, I'm tired of working for other people, so now I want to do the same thing but for free, which is just like ridiculous. And you would think that if anything, this would embitter him more to take out revenge against the Empire, or revenge against the Jedi, or revenge, not this sort of, I just want to settle down. And then, of course, the end of the show just completely upends everything they've said, where he's like, I don't know if this is the life for me after all. And you're like, what? Then what was the point of the show? I don't get it.
Yeah, but at least at the end, Donnie, we can rest in the fact that he's now supported by 6 angsty teenagers on colorful bikes. That made the series.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you know, he obviously is a great proponent of human rights, which is why this meme that talks about how he, smack talks Bo-Katan, who's a known racist, xenophobic terrorist. Yeah, it's so funny. Like, you can have a character like Bo-Katan. You can say Bo-Katan's a racist or xenophobic, whatever, but it's like, just because in the context of the show, Boba smack talked her doesn't mean he's this immigration rights advocate. Like, right. That's so stupid.
Or animal rights with the Rancor, right?
No. Oh, no. Yeah, what's with Star Wars and the animal rights? In Last Jedi, remember they free the
don't even talk about it. It's too much. I can't.
Now it's worth it.
All of our friends are about to die in this big intergalactic, fleet battle, and we're gonna go free some knockoff horses from their prison.
And now it's worth it. It's okay. We freed some humans, and that was good. But now that the animals are freed, now it's worth it.
Yeah, now it's worth it.
Okay. Awful. Cool. We'll move on to the next post here. All right, and this one comes from a friend of the show, Bill Crystal, verified, so we out him. Bill Crystal tweets, Kevin McCarthy says, "There's no place in our party for any of this white supremacy or anti-Semitism," end quote. Mike Pence, "There is no room in this party for apologists for Putin," end quote. When a politician says there's no place or room in his party for something, it's oozing out of everywhere. So this is the cringe post, and I just wanted to add in one extra post that I think helps demonstrate why this is a very cheap semantic game he's playing. Bill Kristol, I guess 4.5 years prior, tweets a quote from a Reagan speech. So this speech was given by Ronald Reagan, and Bill Kristol quotes it. And he specifically quotes, "The politics of racial hatred and religious bigotry practiced by the Klan and others have no place in this country." So, by Bill Kristol's own logic, Ronald Reagan was covering for white supremacy and racism oozing out of the country and oozing out of his administration, I suppose. This kind of thing is always a moving goalpost. What strikes me the most about this is in the same way that people always say, just apologize for this, just disavow white supremacies, just say slavery is wrong, all these things. The moment they do, for instance, Kevin McCarthy saying there's no place in our party for white supremacy or anti-Semitism, or Mike Pence saying there's no room in this party for apologists for Putin, then they just say, oh, look, they're using this specific phrase, which means that they actually support it or that it really exists. It's always a moving goalpost. And if you kowtow to this sort of bullying about just say the line, they're always going to find a way to use it against you, even if you say exactly what you want or they want you to say on the altar of respectable opinion.
Yeah, definitely. What's funny to me is that I think Bill here, he's trying to say something at least somewhat profound, and I think he ends up saying something that is so obvious when you look deep into it. You know, he says when a politician says that there's no place or room in his party for something, it's oozing out of every pore. You're basically saying that when politicians open their mouths, they're lying. It's like, well, duh. We know that like they don't mean what they say, and we know that their words are often, you know, distractions, or they're meant to kind of cater to certain parts of their party. It's not very often that you're going to find a politician who, you know, if he searched his inner soul, would be saying something that aligns perfectly with his or her own universal value or his or own personal values. So it's just such a dumb comment, I think, when you zoom out and you look at it and you say, well, yeah, obviously politicians are lying, and you know, we can easily just turn this around on you and say that the words that are coming out of your mouth are probably just as fallacious as anything else that you're quoting.
Yeah, well, and I mean, Bill Kristol, I don't know. Do you think he has any sort of track record of being wrong on things like that? I don't know. Nothing comes to mind.
No, not at all. No.
Yeah, and it's funny because there was this controversy in some inner fighting of the circles of Libertarian Party politics a couple years ago. There was this petition that was passed around from different members of the Libertarian Party that was right around the narrative of sort of this libertarian to alt-right pipeline got spouted up, which was just such a funny, stupid thing to talk about anyway, which we could talk about. But when this was in the talks, and now there was this big focus on are libertarians creating racists, which is like, no, the libertarian philosophy quite obviously rejects the idea of racism. But this was in the heat of things, and so some of the more quote unquote respectable libertarians were passing around this petition that was a denouncement of white supremacy or racism. I don't remember. It was one of those two, and they're like, we are putting a public pledge denouncing racism and slavery. And then they were passing it to, and they were sort of putting it in front of these people who were sort of in the less respectable camps. They're saying, why don't you sign this? And, you know, they were saying, no, I'm not going to sign your pledge. Like, the fact that you would offer me this pledge is insulting. Listen to any number of the talks I've given. Read any of the things I've written, and you will understand from my philosophy, of course I'm not a racist. The fact that you're trying to get me to come out and say, I stand against racism, means that there's sort of like this, you draw this attention to like, oh, why would you have to go out and say it then? Like, that's so insulting and demeaning. In the same way that you can say things like, Nick, have you ever thought about murdering, the infants in an orphanage? And you're like, what? Why would you? No, of course not. Hey, I'm just asking questions, Nick. I'm just asking questions, right? Obviously, I'm the loser there in that interaction, but it flips the script to make it look like it's on you because you're either not going to answer the question because it's insulting, or you've answered it and it's like, wow, interesting that Nick has to come out and deny wanting to murder infants in an orphanage. Interesting. And so it's that same thing here where they're just hammering people over and over, say white supremacy is bad, and then they say it, and then he's like, politicians lie. And you're like, yeah. So why did you want him to say anything in the first place then? It's a total dunce move.
Yeah. Well, if you might say, hey, Nick, say that Black Lives Matter. It's like, there's so many levels there. There's the level of the principle itself, like, do Black Lives Matter, of which I unequivocally agree that
yes.
Black Lives Matter. Then there's the level of, like, the organization of, the actual, or the structure, Black Lives Matter. And then there's the movement. Mm-hmm. So if I say, yeah, Black Lives Matter, am I agreeing to the tenets of the organization, which, doesn't support the nuclear family? It's like, no. So why are you requiring me to at least implicitly, if not explicitly, say that I agree with something that's against my values? And that's just an issue of words, right? And there, unfortunately, in greater political discourse, there's not a lot of room for nuance. So you're stuck with these little, pithy Black Lives Matter. Well, if you unpack that, there's a lot more underneath the surface. And of course, people will say, well, you shouldn't have to unpack that. It's like, well, why? Yes, I should. I should be specific about what I mean, and I should mean what I say when I say it.
Yeah. Well, and it's the exact same route as the phrase "my body, my choice," which to sort of the glee of a lot of conservatives who've been against mask mandates or vaccine mandates, they now spit back in the face of people who are pro-choice, where you can try to boil down a whole philosophy and ideology into a phrase like that, or a statement, or a signed petition or whatever. But the reality is, when you try to make things simple that are complex, they will be used in ways to hurt you. And it sucks because you wish you could just unequivocally go out and say things like, yes, Black Lives Matter, but you know that the context will be taken away from it. It will be used to bludgeon you over the head. It will be used to help promote a movement that has co-opted that idea, but also tries to co-opt it in service of other more pernicious ideas like Marxist ideologies. Like, I don't want to give credence to a movement that's telling me that I am an evil person for wanting to raise kids in a nuclear family and believing that structure is good. I don't want to promote an organization that's telling me that because I believe that people should voluntarily exchange goods and have no forcible no forced interaction or coercion or whatever, that I'm an evil person for that. I don't want those ideas to get promoted. So why would I carry water for them by helping promote their cause? So if you're asking me, do individual lives who happen to be Black matter? Of course they do. Even when it comes to things like, are there certain segments of our laws that have disproportionately impacted minority communities? Yes. And we should change those things. But it's not to say that I support this Black Lives Matter movement. And I think as soon as you start doing that, then you literally get these people who keep pushing you. They just keep battering you over the head. And it's, again, that always moving goalpost, as you can see Bill Kristol doing.
Yeah, and just to wrap it up, I guess, thinking about, that these political statements, the older I get, the less buy-in I have for these kind of pithy 3, 4, 5 word slogans that, carry so much weight with them simply by nature of how simple they are. And I would much rather carry around a book explaining my political philosophy and just handing it to someone saying, well, just read it, please. This will answer a lot more of your questions than my 5 words can.
Yeah, exactly. Then again, sometimes using the fewer words can rustle some jimmies, which is always fun to do at a party,
Yeah, I know you're all about rustling jimmies.
Okie dokie. We'll move on to our next post here. And we'll wrestle some more Jimmies along the way.
Stop it.
This one, this one comes from a verified Twitter user named Diana Zicklin Berendt, I believe. Sorry for the mispronunciation if that was wrong. And the tweet reads, "Indoors in a public place, wear a mask. Ignore the guidance. It's the right thing to do." And then posts a mask selfie wearing an N95, I believe. Okay, so this one goes under the accidentally based category for the latter half, where it says, ignore the guidance, it's the right thing to do, because what this person is intrinsically admitting is that, and it's an obvious truth, we've all known it, I've probably made this point before, but we all recognize that official institutions that tell us what is and isn't right does not determine what is and isn't right. There are realities that extend beyond authorities, and if your only line of reasoning is appealing to an authority, then you are at the whims of whatever they choose for absolute truth and absolute morality and what is the correct or incorrect actions. So, now that the CDC has officially come out and basically made it optional to use masks in most places in the country, and Washington State just lifted their mask mandates. We were tied for the last with the last 4 states, I believe, to do so. I don't have to wear a mask anymore. These people still want you to wear it because it's the right thing to do. You have to ignore the CDC, the thing they've been preaching at us for literally nonstop for 2 years, to just follow the science, just follow the CDC guidelines, just listen to Dr. Fauci. And now that it's not in line with that narrative anymore, they are so brainwashed about this to the point that they're saying, well, now don't listen to the authorities because it's going against my point.
Yeah, and I think what's hilarious now is that I think the majority of Americans can now join behind you on this bandwagon, because it's just ridiculous to me that the people, like you said, that have been saying, follow the science, follow the guidance, are now saying are now saying, well, let's jump off. It's time to jump off the guidance bandwagon and say, yeah, we're going to go it our own now. And I've been trying to work out in my head why this is the case, why these people that have been so dependent on the government for their own sense of security have now decided to jump ship and are going with their own gut. It's a very inverted, kind of twisted way back around to, the less authoritarian ways of thinking, and yet it's still authoritarian. It's very odd. I can't quite wrap my head around it.
It's funny. It makes me think. I think on the last episode that I uploaded, we were talking about this post where this person's 9-year-old was talking about how I don't think Joe Biden understands how easy it is to wear a mask, and I think he's wrong about that, lifting the mask guidelines, and all these people talking about smart 9-year-old and good, wise kid, he knows a lot and stuff, and it's like these people will latch on to what makes them feel comfort and safety. And so the fact that the government was so effective in its propaganda for a lot of these people for years and years and years has almost made them reduced to taking authority from figures like 9-year-old children, as long as it still touts the line that they were indoctrinated into believing for 2 years. It I guess shows a little bit of hope in kind of a weird way. I guess the white pill, the silver lining of this is that we aren't totally in Orwell. We aren't totally in 1984, I should say. Orwell's 1984, because one of the famous lines from there, we've always been at war with other country. There's two other countries, and you were at war with one day, and then the next day they switch ones, and they said we've always been at war with this other country, and that obviously hasn't quite worked for the government. They said, we're in a pandemic. If you don't agree with the CDC guidelines, you want to kill grandma, and now they're saying, well, no, it's okay to not wear a mask, but people at least have a memory. Unfortunately, the indoctrination was strong enough to leave a lasting impression, but they're not so malleable as to think, well, now the CDC says it, so it's okay. I guess that's the only sort of positive spin I can put on that, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think you articulated my point better. It's encouraging almost to see that these people can think for themselves and say,
kind of.
maybe the government isn't right, but that it hasn't gone to its eventual conclusion, which is that I can actually think for myself. It's still that I have a set narrative that's in my head, and that narrative needs to continue for me to feel safe. And so I think you're right. I think there's hope that maybe eventually that will start to work out for them in their own heads.
I wonder if part of it has to do with masking and that that whole ideology of vaccine mandate support and masking mandate support. If they liked it because it was a outward sign of their inward conviction, the public virtue signal that you could use to show that you were one of the good ones, that you are morally right, and you could signal to others, I'm a rule follower, I obey the rules. And now that the CDC's taken that away from them, it almost even more becomes this, because they're going to think, in the face of normies taking off their masks, you can still signal that you care about preserving other, health and not being selfish, flying in the face of all the facts of the matter, of course. But it was this very easy way to show off and virtue signal without even having to say anything. And now it's taken away from them, but it gives them almost more of a platform to be the one wearing the mask in the grocery store when no one else is. And so I wonder if that plays into it, because time and time again through history, we see that there are different status symbols that people latch onto that you don't necessarily always expect. There's some things where it's, fashion in one area that kind of picks up, but then you see other kinds of things signal to people, and it's sneaker collecting, like that's a huge industry, and like the kinds of shoes you have is an incredible signal of if you're in the in crowd for that. Something as silly as like Google Glasses, when those were coming out, those got sort of slammed as a means of showing your status or your symbol. And to me, this one is almost a signal of the cross around your neck for the non-religious person, but for the person who wants to say, I'm a moral good person. And losing this is almost frightening for them, and they now identify that mask wearing with morality, that it doesn't matter what the actual guidance is anymore, because they've linked the two too much.
Yeah, I think that's the cynical half of the coin, to the full coin being, the people that are just living in fear constantly. Yeah. So you have the people that are virtue signaling that may not think that it works, but, kind of need to put on that face in order to show other people. And then you have the ones that believe that masks work and believe that that's going to protect them from the virus, and are so convinced that the government lifting that is going to cause a new variant to spread really quickly, are just going to keep it on and maintain their own personal mandate, just because they're afraid of it.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing that I will say on this is I do want to clarify. Anyone should be free to make their own decisions, and small businesses should be free to enforce a mask mandate if they want to. I think that it's stupid. I think the government has propagandized, coerced, and bludgeoned people into believing things that are nonsense. And so I think that for every second that I can say that these things are stupid and you shouldn't do them, I will do so. But it should go without saying that obviously I support anyone's individual right to wear a mask, and I support any business's individual right to enforce a mask mandate. What I am not for is the state enforcing and imposing those on people or businesses, as they have done. And I think that that's been overall very detrimental and harmful, and is now going to cause many more businesses and people to think in ways that they otherwise would not have had these mandates not been imposed. So it's one of those things where your principles kind of hurt to hold sometimes. And I think that's kind of where Republicans often go wrong, is they'll ban the kinds of, they'll ban mask mandates from private businesses. And on the one hand, my personal preferences are sympathetic, where it's like, yeah, I wish that they wouldn't be allowed to do this because I think it's based on phony science and I think it's based on propaganda. But overall, I think it's a terrible move because it's, again, the government telling a business what they can and can't do, which is why, if they didn't have that authority in the first place, they wouldn't have been able to impose a mask mandate on the country.
Right, which is similar to the Republican campaign against CRT in the schools, right? The Republicans will say, well, we want kids to be able to learn the whole story about American history, and they, act as if they want free expression to be the status quo, and then they turn around and they say, we're banning all those books. We're doing it. We're banning, and all their fanboys cheer, and it seems like a bit of overkill when you zoom out and look at the greater picture.
Yep, and that's why I really appreciate Corey DeAngelis' point, where it's like, if you, no matter how you feel about these policies, and you can advocate against them or for them, whatever. I think they're terrible personally, but regardless, it's just an argument for why you should be separating public education from tax dollars and letting people take their money where they want to put it, for their students and things like for their kids. Let the money follow the student, or better yet, stop funding it publicly. But having more freedom of choice is always a better thing, because then if you disagree with the CRT rulings, great, you don't have to be under them. And if you want to go to a place that's going to teach CRT-ish rulings, then you can take your kid there, and that's what freedom's kind of about. So,
yeah.
Okie dokie, we'll move on to our next cringe post here. This one, again, is less of a political take, more of a cultural one here. So this this first tweet is from I believe I think he might own the esports team Tempo Storm, and he's an online personality, and he's in that esports sphere. He tweets, oh, sorry, I didn't even say his name. Pokegame tweets, the DS download era of multiplayer games was undefeated. If one of the homies had Mario Kart, all the boys were eating. And if you do not understand what that tweet means, I'll decipher it here a little bit. The Nintendo DS was a portable gaming console, and it had a feature in many games where if one person owned a game, you could send out a signal to nearby players who had DSs, and maybe they didn't have that game, but they could sort of download the temporary data onto their DS, and they could all play multiplayer, even if there was just one copy of the game between the 8 people. So that's sort of what he's talking about. He's saying, if one person had Mario Kart and you had a DS, it was great because everyone who had a DS nearby could play Mario Kart, and it was great, and that's a good thing. And to that tweet, we have a reply saying, why does everyone keep acting like having friends was the default life experience? It effing wasn't. It still isn't. Stop acting like there was this kind of S as a default in most kids' lives, because it's getting old and it's heavily harmful. Wow, I just kind of started laughing when I saw this, and I feel bad for this poor person, but listen, the default in life is having friends. Humans are social creatures, and even if you are an antisocial person, the odds are you have tried to make friends in your life. And so if that was unsuccessful, I'm sorry, and you don't deserve to not have friends. Really, you don't deserve isolation, but you don't get to dictate how people speak and how the default life experience is for the vast majority of people because of you being the exception. The default in life is having friends. It's the default way humans are wired. You don't get to dictate that just because you maybe didn't have that good experience growing up.
Yeah, and I don't have any evidence to back this up, but I just get this strange feeling that this guy has a few friends that he's pretty close with, and he's just had a big fight with them, and right. He's just sounding, just complaining about them and saying, oh, well, this isn't how it should be because I just had a, bad experience with my friends today and blah, blah, blah. Obviously, it's like me saying, well, the default of human experience isn't to eat, right? I haven't eaten for the past week. It's not default as I'm wasting away and dying.
Right as someone's like tweeted like, oh, there's nothing like going out to a cafe and getting a nice grilled panini, you know, and they're like, stop acting like getting a good panini is the default experience. It's not. Mine was burnt. Okay. You're like, that is the default experience, man. Doesn't mean that your experience isn't valid. It just means that you don't get to police other people. That's the crazy thing too, is it's like, even if let's for the sake of the argument say that it wasn't the default life experience of having friends, what is invalidated about his tweet? Absolutely nothing. He can still say that this was a magical experience. And in fact, what I would say, you know, is in any kind of situation where you're in a small minority or a niche community, oftentimes that makes those times more special. And so even if this person's tweet was accurate, which it's not, it's totally inappropriate and wrong in the context anyway. To say, man, I like when you get a really well cooked steak, it is incredible. Or maybe better yet, this to say, oh my goodness, I went out and I just tried, caviar for the first time, something expensive, I don't know, and it was incredible. And then this person tweeting, why stop acting like having caviar for dinner is the default experience? No one's saying that it is. It's not the default experience. That doesn't mean that someone can't still enjoy that. And furthermore, it doesn't mean they can't say that they can enjoy it. This weird policing of people's experiences because they're different than your own is totally bizarre to me.
Yeah, and perhaps a better analogy would be, you know, myself being an only child. If you said, oh, well, I just hung out with my brother David and, you know, he's a great guy and we had a great time. And I was like, that is not the default experience, Donald. Yes. How dare you? Yeah. So like you said, well, first of all, yeah, actually more people probably have siblings than are only children. And secondly, I probably shouldn't be projecting my, you know, loneliness onto you.
That is really it, right? It's this projection of your own misery onto other people, and that's really where you see a lot of the control from people who aren't in positions of power. They and not to say that that's a bad thing, not being in a position of power or whatever, but you see a lot of these sort of wannabe tyrant type ideas coming from people who are deeply miserable themselves, and we are so, I don't know. I think the common culture is very aptly, well, not aptly, but it very efficiently conveys a sense of if someone else is happy and has something better than you, you should covet that. You should be envious of that, and you should bring them down to your level, because other people succeeding when you are not means that they are in the wrong, not something's wrong with you, or that you have that's the other thing. Having an unfortunate upbringing or being in an unfortunate circumstance, sometimes that can be of your own your own cause or your own cause of inaction. Sometimes it's not, but it's okay to recognize that I'm in an unfortunate state and maybe that's not my fault, or that doesn't make me less of a person. So if this person's saying, yeah, I wish I had friends for that, it might be a little bit more pathetic, but it's still a better sentiment than saying, stop acting like that's the default. You can't speak in that way because I didn't have that. Understanding like, man, having friends and having a social experience would be a great thing that I hope to achieve. That's a much healthier way. And the ways that people actually build themselves out of unfortunate circumstances is by having aspirations to getting to a better place rather than decrying anyone else who happens to have a more fortunate or privileged situation.
Yeah, and I think that all demonstrates this tweet is really an example of a place where the line between descriptive and normative is kind of blurred. You know, where he's trying to say, well, you know, your life should be or shouldn't be like this, or it should be like this. Whereas we're saying, no, we're describing what it is, and you're trying to make a normative claim, we're trying to make a descriptive claim. Let's make sure that we get back in our lanes so that we can figure out, well, what is reality for some people? What is reality for this individual? But then what should reality be for humans in general? And I think by separating that out, we can simultaneously say, yeah, maybe you had a really rough childhood where you were really lonely, but also normatively, we would hope that you would be socialized and have a lot of friends and be healthy, and that would, arguably be the best thing for you. And
that's totally it. You hit the nail on the head there. And I think that a lot of times people get confused because when we speak descriptively, people often interpret it normatively, and it's funny because no one colloquially speaks like that. When, for instance, I say, "Oh man, chocolate cake is the best," I'm not saying there is nothing in existence that surpasses what chocolate cake is in its entirety, its substance, its being, its taste. There is nothing that achieves the level of good that is chocolate. That's obviously not what I'm saying. Colloquially, I'm just saying I really like that. And so when Pokegame says, the DS download era of multiplayer games was undefeated, he's not, and makes this claim, if you had friends playing, it was a great time. He's not even saying that, this was the peak of life. Everyone who knew what fun was only knew it through this way. This was the way to achieve and to understand. That no one is making that normative claim when you're saying these things. And yet the interpretation here is stop acting like that's the default life experience. He made no claims on that. He made no claims on what was normal. Even if you took it in sort of the most literal interpretation way, you have to contrive a lot to get there. But still, that's not how people speak. And I wonder if that's just maybe a shame of the internet where people sort of read things more literal interpretation versus colloquial. I don't know. Maybe that's a cause. Maybe it's just this person kind of being willfully ignorant.
Yeah, probably just a situation where they wanted to see what they wanted to see. And they wanted to react the way that they wanted to react.
It's like that comic meme where someone's like, "I'm angry about this thing," and someone's like, "Here you go," and they hand them like a card that says "solution," and they burn it. They're like, "I don't want a solution. I want to be mad."
Exactly.
Like, that's so many online tweets. Okay, we'll move on to our final cringe post of the episode. This one comes from Reddit. Yes, I know. I'm sorry. I'm pulling from Reddit again, but sometimes you go for the low-hanging fruit because it's too tasty. Okay. This was found on the lowest of low-hanging fruit on Reddit, on Our Politics, in response to an article from The Guardian talking about how with the way that Republicans are, there's no going back to politics as usual, I believe. This comment doesn't really reply to anything specifically in that article. I scanned it, and it just seems more like this person's using this forum as a place to sort of shout into a chamber of emptiness and shout his mad ravings into the void. So this comment reads, "I would approve a full quarantine of enemies of democracy and lock up these traitorous filth and set a foundation that past enemies' ideology of the land of the free will sorry, this grammar's a little rough, will not go unpunished like in Germany, and their strict rules for media and dangerous ideologies." So if you couldn't decipher that throughout, basically he's saying he would approve a full quarantine of the enemies of democracy, lock up traitors that that go against the set foundation of the past of the land of the free, and make sure that they don't go unpunished, akin to Germany and their strict rules for media and dangerous ideologies, which is a terrible, terrible precedent. There's a lot to break down here. I'm going to start with what I was kind of briefly mentioning to Nick before we started recording, which makes me laugh, which is the phrase, the enemies of democracy. Now, he's talking about, people who are traitors to the foundations of the United States and the enemies of democracy. And I just have to wonder if this person recognizes that the Constitution is kind of an anti-democratic document. So the Constitution says, look, we're going to elect the House of Representatives by democracy, democratic vote. And then that House of Representatives, which is already not the people, not the majority of the people, just a representation of them, then we're going to have them vote on some things. But then, after that, we're going to have another chamber vote on that same thing that is picked by people who the people vote for. So yes, it's kind of democratic, but it's really through many layers of checks against democracy, because otherwise you could just have pure democratic votes on things from the people. Okay, and that is one of the three branches of our government. And then you have to go through the Supreme Court to review, well, not next in the order sequentially, but speaking next, you have the Supreme Court who reviews laws that may be passed in a democratically majority approved system, and they can specifically strike them down as unconstitutional. So this document, this constitution that was set up by a minority, not a majority of Americans, and by now all of them whom are long dead, they set up this supreme document to rule the land, and then any sort of democratic change or any sort of democratic influence can be struck down if it disagrees with that document. And lastly, the document sets up the executive, who can, for whatever reason he wants, veto. So if you support the United States system, you inherently support some level of anti-democracy. So if you are saying someone is an enemy of democracy, that's a very broad term that can encompass a lot of people, including the most patriotic, constitution-loving right-winger, or the most lefty, hippie, anarchist, I suppose. Not to say that all anarchists are lefty hippie. That's kind of a misnomer. But there's a lot of anarchists out there, and there's a lot of varieties of some very interesting schools of thought. Go read the Anarchist Handbook by Michael Malice. Good collection of essays. Anyway, so enemies of democracy made me laugh before anything else in this, because enemies of democracy is such a vague term that is kind of meaningless and is just used as a buzzword to excite people and to think, oh, that sounds dangerous. We're taught to love democracy.
Yeah, well, that kind of goes back to our second cringe, right? Where we talked about how, the words and phrases that we use often have a lot more meaning behind them than we might initially think. And as someone who went through not the public school system, but the private school system, perhaps even more so in a private school sometimes, given how patriotic they can be. But just phrases like that, like enemies of democracy. There's probably a few others that I could come up with if I had time to think, but the meanings that are infused in those in the schools are, they generally are of all the same meaning, which is that, you're for America and you're against anything that's against America. Like, it's not really clear what that all means, but as you just described, like, when you actually break down these words and look at the meanings behind them and the political structures that we have in this country, just throwing out like the phrase enemies of democracy, it's not really helpful in you making your point. And then of course he just throws in Germany, which I think is great. Just as a cherry on top, we're just going to throw Germany in there because we all know Germany doesn't win wars, but they win arguments.
Yeah, if you shut people up, you can win the argument pretty well. Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost too easy to sort of scoff at the idea that you're literally quarantining and locking up people who disagree with your ideology and where that gets you, right? No one in history has successfully locked up people for espousing wrong-think and bad ideas and come out as the good guy. I don't think that exists. I don't think you're saying, well, there's actually a pretty moral and just society that had anti-blaspheme laws. I actually really don't think that that's the case, and that's one of the reasons I'm not a theonomist. I generally, personally, my values are religious in the context of Christianity, and I'm a Christian, and I think that ethics needs to be based on those principles. But when you tie that into the law, you end up with a kind of perversion of the power structures to twist whomever is in power, because it's incredibly difficult to hold a perfectly ethical government. And so, even if you're trying to balance that in the sense of religious or just generally ethical considerations, it's very subjective on how things get interpreted and who does or doesn't get quarantined, thrown into jail, locked up, let alone when you use a phrase, your whole basis of enforcing these kinds of things and silencing people is based on a phrase, enemies of democracy. Again, democracy is not a value in and of itself. It is not a value statement or judgment, other than, I guess if you're making it an ethical statement or a value judgment, then the ethic is that whatever the majority thinks is right. And so that's a very dangerous path to go down, because there are plenty of times where the majority is ethically wrong in a scenario, and we have the we have the blessing of being able to look back and hopefully learn from those mistakes. But when you look at the globe, prior to the great liberalization and freedom of slaves in the West, and then sort of throughout the rest of the world as well. But prior to that, basically the whole globe just thought slavery was a normality. It was just the default. And so there would be no reason to challenge that on any ethical grounds if your entire moral framework goes from, silencing anyone who's an enemy of democracy. The first person to say, I don't think slavery is right, would get silenced, locked up, and thrown, because it goes against the past ideology of the land, and it's a dangerous ideology that could upset the economic realities of your system.
Yeah, and to that same point, that I think that this cringe post wouldn't be as cringy if it wasn't full of these same kinds of language that we saw from the Republicans during the quote unquote war on terror, right? Like
exactly
all of that stuff that we're looking at in that post, while it may not be grammatically correct, clean it up a little bit, throw a White House seal on it, and you've got some speeches from the Bush White House. Like and that's what's terrifying, is that this kind of, inclination towards authoritarianism. It's not some like radical thing that you find on the fringes of 4chan or Reddit here in this case. It's something that you can find easily in the halls of power and by the individuals who are attempting to exercise that power through the various organs of the government.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The people who are sort of leading the charge towards authoritarianism are very often the ones who don't see that they're doing the exact thing that the opposite party or person or ideology did just 10 years ago. And it almost makes me sometimes question myself. Like, am I missing something here? Like, is there some level of nuance that I just am not able to read here? Because this person is so obviously doing the exact same thing they criticized 10 years ago, and yet no one seems to be calling them out on it, except for people who think similarly to me. And so I'm like, am I just living in an echo chamber here? Am I missing some context? What do I need to learn to get on his level? But I just don't think it exists.
It's you and Bill Kristol. You guys are both... You're both in that echo chamber. That's what he's trying to get through his tweets. He's trying to, but unfortunately he himself is caught up in the irony and he can't see that. So he needs you to illuminate him.
Got it.
Cycle.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'll have to call up my good old buddy Bill Kristol and get him online. Maybe he can join us for an episode of Cringe Post. That'd be great.
Yeah,
he can publicly disavow racism on it too. Because I don't know. I haven't heard him publicly disavow it, so I don't really know if he's racist or not. That's the problem.
It's a problem.
Okay. Well, unless you have any last thoughts on this Reddit post, I think we're going to wrap up the show. So thank you for being here and helping me host this episode, Nick. I greatly appreciate it. And thank you guys for listening in. As always, we appreciate your shares, your comments, and your subscriptions, all that jazz. Help us bump up in the algorithm if you would. And we will see you on the next one.